In Brazil, we don't have dividend taxes. We have like 34% corporate taxes. And when we look to most developed countries, they tax dividends. And
what about capital gains?
After the Tax Act in the United States, like it's the corporate tax.
But what about capital gains? Forget about the corporate tax. Corporate tax is all over the world. So
capital gains is 15%. It's 15% Brazil.
15%?
Yeah. Yes. But do you think?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Sorry. Do you think having higher corporate taxes and not taxing dividends, is not an incentive to reinvestment for the?
I don't think that's the issue. I think it's just an extension of what you said earlier, which is how do Brazilians invest? They invest for income, right? Because that's how you cover inflation. They want a fixed. So you go to a bank, you get a 15% interest rate. They're used to collecting the income. So I think the government is operating under this misguided view that if they make stocks look like fixed deposits, that people will like stocks, which is a terrible way to think about equities. You know who's hurting? It's hurting young growth companies. You ask me how come there are not more IPOs in Brazil? If people expect you to pay a big dividend, that's why they buy stocks. Why would I ever, as a young growth company, list myself in Brazil? What Brazilian investor is going to buy my stock if I told them, look, I've got negative cash flows for the next 10 years. Not only will I not be paying you a dividend, but I'll keep issuing shares. The typical Brazilian investor who's trained to collect cash flows and dividends every year is going to say, you're a terrible company, go away, which means Facebook, Google, Amazon, Apple would never have made it to becoming who they are today. So I think it's a reflection. Inflation leaves deep wounds. I mean, hyperinflation in Brazil was what, 1991, 92? You know what? You're still recovering from it. You might think you're over it, but it's still, the system is structured around dealing with inflation and getting investors okay with it. So I think that's what you see here. Your history kind of affects almost everything that you're seeing.
Yeah, it's like a culture embedded in our population, and they have to play the game.
It's not a cultural thing, it's an inflation thing. If you had hyperinflation in the US, you would have exactly the same kind of thing happening in the US. So don't blame Brazilians for what they're doing. Blame what happened in your economic history for why Brazilians are what they are. Because it's so easy to say, well, culturally, we're not long-term. We're all short. We're all impatient. I don't like that. I think investors all over the world have a distribution. There are long-term investors in Brazil, and there are short-term traders in Brazil. There are long-term investors in the US and short-term traders in the US. So I think it's not a cultural thing. You are a product of your history. And Brazil has an economic history that has left a lot of deep wounds on investors. So I'd never blame investors for what they do. I look at the history and say, I understand why you're doing what you're doing, but it's hurting you now because of that. So I think you got to cut some slack for Brazilian investors.
That's such a great point of view. It opens my mind. I thank you so much